In this packet is a way to save a decent chunk of change on some RAM, something which in the middle of a RAM apocalypse is obviously appealing. The thing is, there are some, and potentially not insignificant, downsides to this method, which is the whole point in this video. We want to see if the savings are worth the sacrifices. Not sure what that's for. And the solution is laptop DDR4. This little thing is an adapter that lets you use laptop RAM with a desktop motherboard. And to sweeten the deal even more, it comes included with an SSD. You gotta love that value. Now, before I test these to see how much of a performance impact the SSD introduces, which I have a feeling it might be reasonably significant because of one of the specs of these things, but that's what the testing is for, we'll find out later. But before we get into that, we have to look at the pricing of this adapter / laptop RAM solution to see how much money we're saving going the SSD route. Now, the current going rate for 32 gigs of DDR4 is, oh fuck, what in the purgatory hell is that price for DDR4? Okay, so don't buy RAM now, basically, but if you really have to, that is what 32 gigs of DDR4 desktop memory will cost you today. Whereas for my solution, you have to buy RAM and adapters, unfortunately. The adapters cost 23 Canadian drachmi each, which is 46 Canadian dollars for the pair. That's already about as much as we should be spending on the RAM. Now, if you're not as impatient as I was and you can wait a bit for shipping, you can save a decent amount. You can get a pair for about 18 Canadian dollars. I don't think it's the exact same model, but they have the same specs, so they should perform similarly. And then if you're buying new, you can buy 16 gig sticks of laptop DDR4 at 3200 megahertz for about 130 CAD each. So if you buy two of them, that's 260 CAD plus the 46 Canadian dollars that I spent for the adapters, saves us a total of 47 Canadian dollars over just buying desktop RAM, which isn't really a whole lot. The picture looks way better though if we go for the Llama shipped option, which is way cheaper. We save 75 Canadian dollars there, which is, I mean, you know, every little helps, especially in a RAM apocalypse. It's not too bad. Now, you may be thinking of just getting 16 gigs of RAM instead. Well, if you do that, you're probably better off just getting desktop RAM because for some reason you can't get a 2 8-gig kit of laptop RAM for 130 Canadian dollars. The pricing scales differently for 8 gig sticks for some reason. Now, there is also the option of going used, which I would recommend, although when you do search RAM on Craigslist, for some reason this was the first picture that showed up. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But once you've filtered through the RAM only fans, you can get desktop DDR4 32 gigs for about 245 Canadian dollars. Whereas with laptop RAM, you can get 16 gig sticks for about 80 Canadian dollars. And if you do all of the math, you can save about $57 going for the laptop RAM used route over the used desktop RAM route, which means in terms of performance, we really can't afford to lose much performance for this to make any sense to do. Now, when it comes to the testing, I'm going to be comparing 16 gig configurations because I don't have a matched 32 gig kit of laptop RAM. And I'm going to start off with an Intel system. I've got an i5-13400 in here, which I'm pairing with this luscious Gravistar RX 9070 XT, which even at 1440p should make that CPU and RAM blush. And in terms of games, I'm using Counter-Strike 2, Cyberpunk, and Stalker 2. Now, for the baseline tests using the desktop RAM, everything ran as expected. There was no concerns, including the fact that the 9070 XT basically didn't do anything in Counter-Strike 2 at 1440p low settings. Exactly as Gaben intended. Okay, so now that we have our baseline reading with some desktop DDR4 in here, it's time to swap that out for some laptop RAM using these SSD adapters. There we go, ain't that looking real snazzy? Oh wow, that does look goofy as hell. That's clearly aesthetically a real desperation play right there, but Desperate times call for desperate measures. If it works well, who cares that it looks that way?
A few moments later.
Hey, it took a while, but there we go. So we're gonna go into setup. Now, as we mentioned in the looking at the price bit, this does seem to introduce a memory speed limitation. We've lost the option to enable XMPs, but according to the motherboard, our DRAM status says that it's 3200 MHz RAM, although up here, it's saying 2133 MHz. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the DRAM frequency to 3200 MHz in the BIOS, and then see what the motherboard does with it. Not post is what it did with it. Unfortunately, the only speed I could get running was 2133 MHz as per the spec, which in Counter-Strike 2 felt very similar to the baseline test, but we did lose a decent chunk of performance. However, when I moved over to Cyberpunk, things got weird. With the first test run, I got a massive stutter. I don't know if I'd even call this a stutter. The game basically just crashed for a minute and then continued running like nothing happened, which obviously slightly messed with the benchmark results. And then when I tried redoing the benchmark, the game just crashed. After which, I couldn't get it to launch again. Cyberpunk just tapped out. It refused to work with this RAM configuration again. Luckily, Stalker 2 was a lot more allowing. We did also lose a decent chunk of performance, but the game was running. We didn't get the same kind of instability as we saw with Cyberpunk. Next, I wanted to see how an AMD system reacted to this different RAM configuration, so I switched over to a motherboard that had a Ryzen 7 5700X3D in it, an amazing gaming chip. It's the kind of CPU that I would still buy today, so I think it's worth seeing how it holds up to our pretty savage RAM configuration. I mean, just look at how much more frame rate we're getting out of CS2 with our Control RAM configuration. And the news gets even better, because when I dropped our laptop RAM setup in there, it just straight up booted at 3200 MHz, which was a real pleasant surprise, and the performance was an even pleasanter surprise. With CS2, we barely lost any frame rate. I mean, this is borderline within the margin of error territory. And with Cyberpunk, not only did the game not crash, but we didn't lose any frame rate going from the desktop RAM to the laptop RAM. The same goes for Stalker 2. We basically got identical results here, which is amazing news for this slightly cheaper configuration. Out of curiosity, I also dropped the RAM into an older Intel system I had standing around with an 11900K in it, and that system also just straight up booted with the RAM set to 3200 MHz. So it seems like the issues I was having with the first Intel system wasn't generally an Intel problem, just specific to that system. Which means there is at least some RNG involved when considering this RAM configuration for your system. But it could work really well. So with that, let me know what you think. Are the savings worth the potential risk involved and the fact that your system is going to look a little bit like a Mad Max junker? In my opinion, you should just do everything in your power to not buy RAM at the moment, which brings me to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one, and until the next video, bye-bye.